Good afternoon. My name is Shruti Bhatnagar, and I am a board member of MLAW, Maryland Legislative Agenda for Women. And I'm really excited that for our next podcast today, we have with us Diana Phillip, who's the Executive Director for NARAL Pro Choice Maryland. Diana, good afternoon and greetings. Welcome to the show. It's so nice to have you on our show today.
Well, thank you. Good afternoon. Thank you for the opportunity.
Absolutely, and I'm really looking forward to our conversation. Tell us about NARAL.
So, we are the policy political arm of the reproductive rights movement in the state of Maryland. We're statewide. Our office is in Baltimore. We just moved here a couple of years ago. And so, what we do is we work really hard to advocate for reproductive health rights and justice in order to help people choose if, when, and how they form their families and when they parent to do so in dignity, in good health, and in safety. So we are interested in making sure that the state and local governments are not engaged in reproductive coercion, that they're promoting maternal health outcomes for positive outcomes, and that they are doing everything they can to support people to choose when they want to become pregnant.
Well, thank you for sharing that. And I know you have been very involved working with MLAW, trying to advocate on these issues in the General Assembly. So tell us about the priorities for MLAW and NARAL pro-choice for 2021.
So in the Maryland General Assembly this year, we have three main bills that I can talk about. Now, we track over like 100 bills that have something to do with the intersection of reproductive freedom. And so that can be anything from immigration rights, police reform, environmental rights. But mostly we're looking at maternal health care, patient rights, education, anything to do with family planning. And so we have to look at all the bills that need to be defeated that would interfere with our reproductive freedom. So some of our work will go towards defeating those measures that are anti-abortion and very obviously so. But sometimes there are some bills that are introduced that some folks try to twist around or try to attempt to put in an amendment that would change the structure of that legislation or try to restrict access to healthcare in a way that people didn't think about when they first introduced the bill. So a lot of the work we do is making sure that the legislation that's been introduced when it passes is exactly what needs to happen for Marylanders. So not only do we try to defeat measures that would be a problem, we try to advance an agenda that's in the best interest of Marylanders. So the three bills that we have this session that are priority bills, we had 6 bills actually this session, but the three I want to talk about. One is about menstrual equity, and that is trying to have our public schools provide free and size appropriate products in our public schools, elementary, middle school, and high school. And we have another bill about pregnant, expectant, and parenting students, trying to get our school districts to pass policies in order to encourage their enrollment and constant attendance in schools so they can stay on track to graduate and towards economic security. So we want school staff to be able to connect students who need this, resources in the community about childcare, transportation, to identify spaces that are appropriate for lactation, and to allow folks to be able to miss class time to pump. In 2017, we passed the second law in the United States for excused absences for pregnant, expectant, and parenting students for legal and medical reasons. And then the third bill that we're advocating for is building on the work that we've been doing since 2017 with a coalition that we convened called Reproductive Justice Inside. And this is a bill that talks about the continuity of health care provided to people who are pregnant that come into incarcerated in detention spaces. So when someone comes in who's pregnant, we want the ability for that individual to have an assessment whether the pregnancy is high risk, and if that person has been seeking treatment or is interested in seeking any kind of medical treatment for substance use, mental health, or HIV status, that they get the kind of medical care that they want that's very patient-centered. And upon release, that there's already case management in place about how health insurance will cover that continuity of care and what providers are going to when they are released into their communities.
Thank you. This was so informative. And, women issues are on the forefront. We also, the policy work that you are doing is so important because you are right when you said that we need to make sure that the policies are put in place that serve our community in the best way possible, especially when it comes to making sure that families and communities that are most at risk or disproportionately affected have the resources that they need to be successful. It helps improve their quality of life. And when I was reading about the bill, especially I want to talk to you about this one on the bill on public schools providing menstrual hygiene products, because health and hygiene is in the forefront, especially given the issues that we are seeing with people having access to healthcare. How do we make sure that students and women have access to the hygiene products that they need to be for their own well-being? So I would like you to specifically dive a little bit into this bill and tell us about what policy would be put in place if this bill were to pass in the legislation.
Great. Yes. Let's go back a little bit in time. In 2017, Delegate Aruna Miller was the first one to put in a menstrual equity bill, and it passed that year. It was the idea of setting up a grant so that emergency shelters and schools could provide menstrual hygiene products to people that were experiencing homelessness. But what was interesting when we did our research in 2019 is that nobody actually asked for those funds. And so I think that what happened is that with that legislation, it said that school nurses could provide menstrual equity products to students that were experiencing housing instability. But I don't think that the students knew about it. And I'm not too sure exactly how they equipped the products, the nurses with those products. So I was really intrigued by that 2017 law. And then in 2018, with Reproductive Justice Inside, we looked at the issue about menstrual hygiene product access for people who are incarcerated. And we did a donation drive for 13 months where we donated anywhere from 1,000 to 3,000 pads to the Maryland Correctional Institute for Women, because the ladies there were having such a problem with access. And it really brought people's attention to the idea of sexual and reproductive health rights for people that are in the care, control, and custody of the state. Well, the same, and we were successful in passing that into law in 2018. So it made sense to look at other spaces. And when you think about compulsory education, our students are expected to go into schools, and there are going to be times with menstruation that things are not going to go according to plan, especially if you're a young person and you just start menstruating. You're going to have irregular periods. You're not always going to be prepared. And not every family is prepared to talk to a young person about what's going to be like to menstruate. So we thought, well, hey, this is probably the time, since there's this big movement about period poverty that's really raise a great public awareness about how not everybody has access to these products and how it's keeping people from going to work. It's keeping people from going to school as well. People are missing classes. They're missing whole days of school. And I think the statistic is 84% of teens have talked about having missed class time or skipped school altogether because of lack of access to these products. So is there a way that we can possibly have dispensers installed in restrooms in the state of Maryland, in these public schools, elementary, middle school, and high school, and give the school districts 5 years in order to come into compliance, but at least this first year have at least one restroom in an elementary school and at least two restrooms, I believe, in the middle schools and high schools, and then within the next 5 years, make sure that all the restrooms are equipped. And for the middle schools and high schools, at least one male designated restroom in order to allow transgender and intersex youth to have access to those products. So that's the idea of the bill. We know that in working with University of Baltimore School of Law, that when they installed their dispensers, they were only $35 a piece, high quality plastic dispensers. And so we thought this is the best way to go about doing this, talking to young people and talking to their advocates and allies. Look, when we go into our restrooms, we expect toilet paper, paper towels, hand soap. Why can't we have these products on hand for our youth so that way they can have the ability to stay in school and not have to endure the discrimination or stigma or harassment by people who find out that they're menstruating and they're not able to actually take care of themselves. I remember Delegate Aruna Miller, when she was testifying before the Senate committee about her bill, she started going to all these examples about what we do when we don't have these products. And she talked about rolled up socks and, paper towels stuffed in underwear. And the Senate chair stopped her and said, okay, I've had enough. I think I've heard enough. And in fact, because that was a cross-file bill, they voted on that bill at the end of that hearing. That's how important they knew that legislation would be. And so here we've worked with Delegate Kirill Resnick and Senator Sarah Elfreth, along with numerous other organizations across the state, and especially youth-led organizations, in order to try to see if we can get this measure passed.
Thank you for sharing that, Diana. One of the things that really intrigued me was the term that you used, period poverty, and making sure that the issue of affording these products is addressed. And I thought that was really valuable. Also, the statistics that you shared in terms of 84% students missing class time or full days of school because they did not have access to these resources. With so much emphasis on education and all of us wanting to make sure that our future generations have good education as a pathway to a better quality of life and success, it is so important that they have access to these products, and also that we eliminate the barriers that come in the way for success for students, women, and everybody who needs to use these products. I also, as you were talking about that, thinking of a few other things. I am a parent who has a teenage daughter myself, and I come from a very diverse cultural background. I'm an Indian American, and some of the work I have done has been associated with working with immigrant families. And we live in a community which is very culturally diverse in Montgomery County. So in Maryland too. And I wanted to ask you what your experience has been as you work on these policy issues, um, about what are the barriers or stigmas that you might have seen associated with these kind of issues? Because I know that one element of it is, are we really educating youth to have a good understanding? Are their families really equipped to share that information with the students? And how are there any barriers that are related to young girls or students feeling any kind of shame or embarrassment associated with asking for these products? So, can you talk a little bit about that?
I think that there's some families that in certain communities that don't talk to their daughters, they don't talk to their young people about menstruation. And so when you look at the statistics about how 30 to 50% of young people who are going to menstruate are going to do it before the age of 12, I think it really is something that folks need to be aware of, because I think our elementary schools probably know a bit more than the parents themselves about seeing all this younger cohort of young people that are menstruating as early as the age of 8. And I don't think a lot of families, when young people start that early, are preparing. They're not prepared for something such an onset so early on compared to other older generations. So I think that with a combination of schools adhering to the Maryland State standards for health education, where they talk about starting the menstrual cycle education in fourth grade and coupling that with access to these products, maybe we can do more to reduce the stigma and the shame and make it as normalized as possible. I think what's interesting in looking at the period poverty movement is that there's young males getting involved in this too, because they see their friends, their female students and menstruating students who are being harassed, and they know that they're missing school, they're missing class, and that does not bring the education equity that we're supposed to be promised. So it's a really great thing to see this public awareness. And our hope is that by having these products, then it's a very normalized thing. But I'm so quite aware of the pushback, especially about elementary schools. In fact, the Senate version of the bill, they amended out elementary schools. And they said, oh, well, this will reduce the fiscal note and people can just go to the school nurse. And I think that people don't understand that, number one, not every school has a school nurse that's there all the time. And the other thing is that the school nurse is located in one area of the building. So when you know that you might need a product, it's going to be in the bathroom. And I don't think that people actually understand that there can be this sense of insecurity and ill confidence about going to the school nurse about the products, about trying to get to her office at the same time, or his office, in a timely manner to access these products, and how you don't want to talk to somebody in the school nurse's office as if there's an illness because menstrual Menstruation is not an illness, right? And
That's
so the products really should be in the places where they're needed. But people who are pushing back, we stun them with 30 to 50% are going to start their periods before the age of 12. What are you going to say to an 8-year-old who has started her period and it's going to be irregular? I mean, oh yeah, you need to be prepared every single day. Not everyone's going to be prepared every single day. That's a hard thing to do, to really put on the pressure of students. Not everyone's going to need these products, but the people that do, it's going to need to be accessible. And the other pushback that we're getting is about at least one male designated bathroom in the middle schools and high schools for transgender intersex youth. That also got amended out of the Senate version of the bill because people really think it should only be in the female designated restrooms. And I'm hoping that the House Ways and Means Committee will amend that bill back to its original position to allow, if not, at least the male designated schools, and perhaps we can deal with the elementary schools maybe next year. But, there's 5 years that we're giving these school districts to come in compliance. And what we're seeing are the amendments based upon people's antiquated ideas about how menstruation works and how they really think it's only for those that are in middle school and high school. And only for people who are identified as girls.
I think you made some really great points there, Diana. What struck to me was the just within this legislation, the amount of diversity that is there in this policy. It's not just about women, it's about youth, it's not just about girls, it's about transgender people, it's also about youth and adults who are in correctional facilities. You touched on that a little bit earlier. And I think the thing that struck me also was that this is really related to dignity of life. Everyone has the right to live with dignity. And we want to make sure, especially our young people, our youth, who are already juggling a lot when it comes to education and just identity crisis and the kind of mental stress we see in the society associated with so many different factors, that at least we can reduce the kind of stress that comes associated with just having access to resource they need for general hygiene on a regular basis. So thank you for sharing that, because I thought that was really helpful. And while you touched on education, I was also thinking about when we talk about healthcare and hygiene, an important aspect of that, especially for our youth, is having extracurricular activities and the physical activity that we expect them and hope that they have every day of their life, to have a balance between academics as well as physical exercise, right? And I'm sure that not having access to these kind of hygiene products not only impacts their education, mental well-being, everyday lifestyle, but also being able to participate in other activities that enhance their learning experience.
That's exactly right. And it's one of the points that we keep making is that we're not talking just about the classroom. We're talking about the extracurricular activities too, in which our youth should have the ability to enjoy on a level playing field, right? So definitely, I think that you can stay in school a lot longer too if you have access to the products that you need, because that's one of the issues that keeps coming up is the overuse of menstrual hygiene products and how that can lead to sexual health problems. And we've also seen that play out in correctional facilities because we had a problem with the state prison in which they were giving the folks there too few supplies. And so they were overused. And as a result, we had folks that talked about using the innards of mattresses and pillowcases and shop rags and anything they could do, um, but also leading to some poor health outcomes. There's been a lot of talk about how there's a higher rate of cervical cancer for people that after they leave the state prison. So that may be one of the contributing factors, because I know that people also will take the flimsy maxi pads that they're given and turn them into tampons. But the innards of those should not be exposed to the body in that way. So there's really a huge issue when it comes to sexual health care. And so it's not just the ability for us to take care of our bodies while we're menstruating with dignity, it's also taking care of our future fertility. And I think with young people, that is really something we all should be invested in.
Diana, thank you for all the information that you have shared today. Could you also talk about the concerns related to any of the challenges with implementation and access for all ages?
That's an interesting question because working on this bill for the last couple of years, we talked about people having access to clean water in order to clean their hands. And we talked about how there might need to be waste basket receptacles for these products as well. And we were wondering if that was going to be a challenge to any of the schools. Clean water is a continuing challenge for our schools, unfortunately, in some areas in the state of Maryland. We came across this again also with our parenting student policy bill this session when we wanted those that wanted to use appropriate lactation spaces to include easy access to a sink. And we had to take that out because of concerns about, okay, well, what are we doing? Are we mandating that these schools have available clean water in order to clean out the kinds of tubing that's required for these breast pumps? So instead of going in that direction, we ended up supporting other bills like Senate Bill 636, which is Jared Solomon's bill, talking about how to improve water quality in schools. So I see that as a challenge. I think that it's, in so many different respects about clean water. I think the other thing that's going to be interesting to watch in implementation is that if elementary schools are included back into the bill for the Senate version and we keep it in the House version, there's a call for the bill and says the language specifically says size appropriate. And I'm wondering if anybody's going to be looking at that and the quality of the products that are going to be provided to these young people. Size appropriate is really important because there's a big difference in the bodies of 8-year-olds in an elementary school versus an 18-year-old in high school. But the kinds of products I think is going to be interesting about where they're going to get that. What vendors are the school districts going to turn to? I know that's been an implementation problem with the state prison in terms of the vendor that provides paper products to that entity, in which the ladies that are inside complain about the lack of quality of those pads and how they have to wear 3 to 4 pads at a time because the adhesiveness and the absorbability are just really minor, and they really feel that they deserve better products. And so that's going to be interesting about the products as well, and just the quality along with, and that's an important part of access, right? You don't want to give to a student something that they can only use for a couple of hours because the quality is so poor. You want to give products to young people so they can stay in their classroom settings so they can pay attention and be in school and participate instead of I've been given something so flimsy, I have to go change it every other hour.
Absolutely. Thank you, Diana. So, where is this bill right now in the General Assembly?
Well, the House version passed into off the House floor. That's House Bill 205, and it's awaiting a hearing in the Senate. And then the Senate version 427 was heard in House Ways and Means just yesterday. But because the two bills are so different right now, because the Senate version was amended by the Senate Committee, Education, Health, and Environmental Affairs, they now have to have this conversation about what the final bill version is going to look like. So our hope is that the House Ways and Means will take a look at Senate Bill 427 and make a determination if they want to put either of those measures back in or maybe even both of them that have been amended out. And then the Senate committee can make the same changes with the House bill. And so that way, both bills will be in the same position when they come off their respective chamber floors, and we won't have a problem of having two bills that are not the same, because when that happens, you have to go to something called conference committee, in which 3 members of one committee, the House committee, and 3 members of the Senate committee that voted in favor of the bills come together, the 6 of them, and they have to make a decision by majority of vote of what is going to be the final version of the bill. And if they can't come to an agreement, then the bill dies. So our hope is that we can actually come to an agreement about the final version of the bill and have this passed into law.
What can our audience do to support these efforts? Is there some action alerts that you would like to put out for people to maybe email the legislators, or any kind of follow up that we can do to make sure that this bill moves forward in the direction that you just mentioned?
I think the most important thing to do right now is that we are waiting for Senate Bill 427 to be heard by the Ways and Means Education Subcommittee. And the chair of that education subcommittee is Delegate Alonzo Washington. So I think, and he's out of Prince George's County, but because he's the vice chair of the whole committee, anybody can email him and say, we really want to see Senate Bill 427 on the voting list. They can also send a message to the chair of Ways and Means, which is Delegate Ann Kaiser out of Montgomery County. I think those are two messages or two phone calls that can be made by folks that say that we really are interested in this bill. And if people feel very strongly about elementary schools or male designated restrooms being a part of those measures, they should say that as well.
Thank you, Diana. Would you like to share your contact information and tell us how people can get in touch with you if they have any questions about this legislation?
Well, the best way to reach me is going to be by email. So it's going to be Diana, Diana, at prochoicemd.org. MD as in Maryland, not medical doctor, MD.
Thank you so much. And also, people can visit our MLAW website, which is mdlegagendaforwomen.org. We do have the 2021 legislative priorities listed there with all the bills and information. But again, you can also get in touch with Diana to learn more about this bill. Well, thank you so much, Diana. This was a great conversation. I really appreciate you taking the time to share this information with us. And thank you for all the work that NARAL is doing, NARAL Pro Choice Maryland is doing to make sure we have good policies in Maryland that can support families and for a better quality of life.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity.
You're most welcome. Bye, everyone.